Hi, everybody. We are back. This is a live session for an Ask Me Anything with experienced investigators. I'm Jeannie Walters. I am so thrilled to see you all here. It's always great to hear from our community and tackle those questions that you want answered. We are here today to talk about 9 ways. So I'm going to be talking really fast. 9 ways to take action for customer experience success. Some of these things you may have heard me talk about in different ways, but we're talking about all of it today. What are those steps you need to take to make sure you move from ideas to action with customer experience at your organization? So, as always, I'm here with our director of marketing, David Hornreich. David, hello.
Hello, hello, hello from back inside the video box.
That's right. We had an exciting week because after 4+ years of working together this way, virtually from Seattle and Chicago, we actually got to be in person this week, which was pretty epic.
First time in the same room together in over 4 years. We got this photo, which is probably one of the worst photos either of us have taken in our
Yeah, it's
lives.
not great. It's not great.
Not a great photo, but it's proof. It's
It
proof
is
that
proof.
we
And you
did.
can see we're happy. You
We
can see that,
are
it was we were both joking about how will we recognize each other, but we did. We found each other.
somehow. Yeah. And we got together because we were taking action. And that's
That's
what the
right.
topic of today's thing is.
Wow, well
Wow.
done. Well done on that. Yeah, I'm curious too. What are some of you all dealing with? And today's kind of a weird day in the United States. A lot of people have the day off,
Mhm.
not just in the United States, but elsewhere. So, as we go into Easter weekend and in certain parts. So, we might not have some of you live. So, as always, this is a good reminder to, if you have questions that you want us to tackle in these sessions, go ahead and email those in advance to us. We hear from you between sessions. It really helps us develop the content that's important to you. So don't be shy. Reach out on Twitter, reach out on LinkedIn, reach out wherever we are, and go ahead and ask those questions there. And then we stack those up and we answer those in these sessions, which is pretty cool. So, yeah, with that, I think we should dive in. We've got, like I said, we've got a lot to cover. As you join us, if you have questions, don't forget to drop them in. And anything else we should cover before we get started, David?
I don't think so. Let's get
All
into it.
right. Excellent. All right, let's take action. Yes. So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we talk a lot about how to be proactive with your customer experience efforts. We want to make sure that as a customer experience leader, you are successful, not just for your customers, but also for your organization and for your role. So, these are some ideas to take forward to make sure that you are taking the right action to move things forward successfully. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeannie Walters. I am founder and CEO of a company called Experience Investigators. At Experience Investigators, we help CX leaders really become empowered to take the right actions to deliver on our mission, which is to create fewer ruined days for customers. We do this through workshops and training and keynotes and all sorts of different things, as well as a lot of resources on our site. If you're looking for something, please check out experienceinvestigators.com. And specifically, a lot of our resources are part of our Year of CX.com program. So check that out. Lots of workbooks, guides, things that you can really use to move your customer experience program forward at your organization. So, we're going to talk about things in 3 different categories today. I really think about the important ways that customer experience is addressed in these 3 ways. It's a mindset, it's a strategy, and it's a business discipline. Now, we call these 3 facets of customer experience, but to do this well in your organization, you really do need all 3 of these things. But it's one thing to talk about these 3 things and to say, yeah, get everybody's mindset right. Go ahead and turn this into a business strategy. And then don't forget the discipline to actually deliver on that strategy. How do you actually do that? How do you take those steps? That's what we're talking about today. So, this is really about turning that mindset into action. And this means making sure that we want to get everybody in the organization on board with this idea. This isn't just about your customer facing teams like customer service or customer success. This isn't just about your customer experience leadership. This is about really making sure that every single person in your organization understands that you are an organization that's centered on the customer, that it's part of the DNA of how you do things. This isn't something that's bolted on to business. Sometimes I hear business leaders struggling because they say, well, people think it's an add on, it's something else to do. But customer experience is happening whether you are intentional or not. What we're talking about today is how do you actually manage things? How do you apply customer experience management to deliver on the kind of customer experience that you want to see for your customers and one that will deliver results for your organization? Getting a CX mindset is absolutely the first step. Now, this isn't something that happens overnight. This isn't something that you can just wave a magic wand at. It takes effort, discipline, and consistency. We want to make sure that everybody in the organization from the beginning to when they leave us really understand that this is something not only that we talk about, but that we apply in our daily efforts. And we also can connect the dots with them of how their daily efforts impact the customer as well. So when this is done right, every single person in the organization understands how important their role is to the customer experience. One of my favorite examples of this was when I was walking through the Cleveland Clinic, which is an amazing healthcare organization, and there was somebody painting the wall, a custodian painting, kind of touching up a wall. And the CEO actually stopped and said, "Thank you for making a better environment for our patients." And that's the type of thing that we have to understand. Every single person in the organization is living that mission. So, how do we do this? How do we turn this idea of a CX mindset into action? What are the actions we need to take, and where do we need to focus? Culture is absolutely the cornerstone of this. We want to make sure that the culture supports the CX mindset. We want to make sure our employee experience reflects the kind of experience we want for our customers and also helps our employees actually deliver on that experience. And this requires consistent, almost constant communication. We want people to know that this is not something that's a flavor of the month. This isn't something we announce and move on. This is something that we take seriously, we repeat, we we empower people with the right communication at the right time. So this requires a CX culture. Easier said than done, right? We have to make sure that when we are talking about the culture of the organization, we're really talking about what do people feel aligned with? How do they make sure that they are delivering on something bigger than just that effort, that action that they happen to be taking? If you're checking invoices all day, it can feel like you're only dealing with that one thing. But what does that mean? Well, if your CX mission is clear, then you can connect those dots and you can say, I'm checking these invoices because we promised our customers clarity and simplifying their needs. Well, isn't that a great thing to do by reducing the number of mistakes on an invoice? And I use that example just to point out that sometimes we act like these small things aren't connected to this bigger idea. The first step in everything is getting that mission statement right. And not only getting it right, but aligning it with how you communicate out to the organization. So, David thankfully just dropped a link in there that we have a whole workbook to guide you through getting your CX mission statement together. It is absolutely something that will make everything else easier. It will help you guide the mindset in the right way. So, I encourage you take that first step, get that mission statement. Then we want to think about our employee experience. And this is where we really transfer, okay, that mission that we've developed. And we want everybody to have this mindset, but we have to live that. We have to help our employees show up for one another in the same way that we want them to show up for our customers. And so that means really making sure that the employee journey, the employee experience is aligned with this customer experience mission statement. Now, some of this, we can apply the best practices of customer experience to the employee experience, including journey mapping. So, we have a template for you today that you can also check out, but this is about understanding the employee journey and how you can make sure that that is aligned with your customer experience mission and that you are supporting their needs so that they can actually deliver on this CX mindset. If an employee thinks here's a lot about something like we put customers first, we want to simplify their needs, and then we make that employee jump through a bunch of hoops or not have the right tools or not have the right data, then we're not reflecting in that employee experience what we want that mindset to be. So really look around in your employee experience for where are we not doing that? Where are we not simplifying things for our employees? Where are we not showing up for our employees the way that we want to show up for customers? Because if that's misaligned, you're never going to get that full CX mindset of this is who we are and this is how we show up for one another, not just for our customers. And then we need constant, consistent communication. We have all been in those meetings where we hear about something like, we're going to, be customer forward. We're going to put the customer at the center of everything we do. And we hear big words, but then we maybe don't hear about it for a while. It was an announcement, people just move on, they go back to their daily lives. We want to make sure that we are actually addressing, you know what? How are we doing this? Let's tell you about those wins that we're having. Let's tell you about those efforts that are going on. And also, let's keep connecting things back to that customer experience mission. This is about connecting those efforts that are happening, the results that we're getting, and how that goes back to putting the customer at the center of everything we do. It cannot just be words, but at the same time, we need to use a lot of words frequently. We need to get things out there so that they know this is not something that's going away. I mean, we don't talk about the mission of the company once and check it off our list. We need to make sure that we are constantly communicating this and recognizing those employees or those programs or those situations where people lived up to this mission. That is absolutely critical as well. That has to be part of the communication. All right. So, CX mindset, easy peasy, right? It's going to take some time, but this is an evolution. This is something that you continue to work on. It's not a one and done. It's also never quite done, is it? We have to make sure that as we bring people into the organization, we're introducing this early in their employee journey, and then we're reinforcing this throughout the organization, throughout the efforts, throughout the announcements, throughout the goals, everything else. And this is where we get into strategy because I talk to a lot of leaders who say, well, we don't really get a lot of buy in because people think customer experience is something that we do in addition. They think it's a cost center. They think it's something that's nice, but not really something to drive the business forward. Our job as CX leaders is to break down those myths. We have to make sure that we are looking at this as a strategy, not just a strategy that we're trying, but a winning strategy for the business. This is when we flip the script a little bit and we start looking internally and we start saying, what could this do for our business? If we delivered on that CX mission, what would that mean for our business results? Well, this means we have to understand what those results are and we have to execute it in a certain way. So, the first step here, we want to define success. Super important, something that is overlooked and neglected at many, many organizations. So, if you are hearing this and you're thinking, I don't know if we've done that, you are not alone. We're going to show you how. We also want to explore return on investment in many ways. We hear this resistance a lot as CX leaders. Well, what is really the value of this? Why would we invest in this? Let's talk about the many ways that this happens. And then we also want to make a case for resources. We hear again and again from CX leaders that getting that buy-in from leaders to get the right resources can be a challenge. We need to proactively make that case. We need to say, this is why we need these resources. This is how you can invest, and this is the return we expect on getting it. So, when we talk about CX as a strategy, what we want to do is we want to start with the organizational goals. What is important to this organization? What are those annual 3-year, 5-year goals that organizations have? Those have to be specific, right? We don't go out into the world and say, well, the goal of this in a year is to be better. We don't do that as business people. And yet, a lot of CX goals are written that way. It's things like we want to provide a more seamless journey, but we haven't put any way to define that. So, we have something we use that we really like called a CX success statement. I encourage you to check this out. We have another workbook for you, and essentially, what this does is it helps you break down what's important to the organization, what's important to our leaders, because your chief financial officer has different goals than your chief marketing officer. They have different ways of looking at things. We want to make sure we're speaking the language of the leaders that will, have an impact on this and understand and support the efforts that we have. So, when we are looking at the CX success statement, we're breaking that down from organizational to leadership to what are the customer experience outcomes that we want that could drive that. So, if we know that a big goal for the year is higher sales, let's make it really generic. Let's say we want 10% higher sales as an organization. Well, how could CX support that? A better CX will improve renewals, it will improve referrals, it will improve better word of mouth in the marketplace so that you might actually shorten the sales cycle, get more customers on board in a faster way. So you want to kind of look at all of that and create the right formula and then figure out how will we measure that? How will we measure if we're doing well enough in CX that we are driving certain business goals forward? You want to break that all down into the success statement. That will help you have so much clarity about what it means to be successful. If you have not done this yet, I really encourage you to do this. The mission statement and the success statement, those are the foundations. Those are the things that we use to make sure that we are defining success so that we know if we're successful. Because otherwise, we get to a year, 3 years later, people look around and say, well, I don't know, is the journey more seamless? It just seems like, we've been making all these changes, but I don't know. I don't think we have to really invest in that. Customers don't really seem to care because they don't have their arms around how this is really a strategy for the business. Make sure you're speaking about the business goals. The CX success statement will really help you do that. The other thing we want to do is explore all the different ways that there is a return on investment. When we are talking about CX results, it is easy to start talking about just the metrics we use to measure how happy our customers. Now, that's a great thing to measure. We want to stay connected to net promoter score and customer satisfaction rate and customer effort score and all the different things we use for that. We want to stay connected to that. But those are measurements and not outcomes. And so when we are looking at what those numbers actually do for us, we want to go back and connect those to those bigger organizational goals. Now, one of the things that I've been talking about a lot in this marketplace today is the fact that if you can help your customer experience, if you can have happier customers who aren't relying on service as a reaction as much, who aren't complaining in the marketplace as much, who aren't deterring other customers from joining your organization, that actually improves your employee experience to the point where you can reduce employee churn. You can improve the number of employees who stay with you longer. You can improve employee referrals. All of those things make a big, big difference. We have a calculator for you to figure out your customer lifetime value. That can be a really powerful number. If you can watch that number go up, you can really make a case for the return on the investment into a better customer experience for everybody. There are so many ways to slice and dice this. If you go to our website, our blog, and search for value, there's a post where an article where we walk through all the different ways. Make sure you're speaking the language of ROI. That's what business people care about. That's what you need to start talking about more and more and more. And then through your success statement and through understanding the return on the investment, then you can start making a case for your resources. Then you can start saying, you know what, if we understood our data better, we could do more. Or if we had a way to measure more, maybe you don't have a great feedback strategy. If you had a way to gather more feedback at key points in the customer journey, you could make changes faster, you could improve the experience, you could reduce friction, get rid of those obstacles for customers, increase conversion, whatever it is, but you need to make that case for it. Leadership buy-in is crucial for CX. That is the one thing we hear over and over. There is data on this that customer experience leaders say that is the make or break. If you don't have the buy-in of your leaders, it's really hard to be successful because, as we've said before, CX is a team sport. We need a lot of people involved. So this is where you can not just define the strategy, but get into the nitty-gritty. We have something called a CX charter that we like because it's really about defining what are the roles and responsibilities, what can we expect, how does this team interact. It helps you build that cross-functional support. We have a guidebook for you there, that another link for you. We've got lots of links this session. And so check that out because that's something that you can move forward with to really make sure that you're making a case for the resources that not just your team needs, but that the customer experience in general needs. If you know that your customers hate the mobile app and you know that the mobile team has no resources, this can help you cross-functionally make that case for that as well. This bleeds right into the next part, and this is about really understanding your daily actions, your efforts. How do you prioritize? How do you make sure that you can execute on that strategy? This is where business discipline comes in. In customer experience, we often talk about governance, about making sure that there is some oversight, that there is some centralized discipline to this. And this is really about making sure that the efforts and the actions you're taking are driving that strategy and delivering on that CX mission. So this is about the coordinated efforts, regular, consistent habits, all of those things. So you'll hear me talk about that charter again, because that's certainly part of this. Start with the CX charter. There we are. So I got a little ahead there, but the CX charter is something that really helps you define what are the actions that we will take in order to deliver on that success statement and drive that mission forward. You want to measure, communicate, and repeat. This is ongoing. This is something that you can't just check off the list. This is something that you have to move through again and again and again. And you always want to leverage best practices when it's best to do so. So when you look at moving through things, don't get caught up in the tactics. That can happen with CX as well. People say, well, if we have a customer feedback voice of the customer program and we have a journey map, we're doing CX. Those are tactics, those are best practices. They can be very, very helpful. You want to make sure you understand how that all fits into the strategy. So start with the charter. There we go. I got a little ahead, but the charter can be so helpful because it's defining not just what are we trying to do here, folks, but it's also defining, okay, how are we going to do it? How often will we meet? Who's doing what? How do we prioritize? Because when you get that cross-functional team together, one of the things that can happen is that if I'm the marketing leader, I'm going to fight for the things in marketing. If I'm the finance person, I'm going to fight for the things in finance. Your role as the CX leader is to keep everybody focused on what, how, and what we're prioritizing on behalf of the customer and on behalf of what we've defined as success in our organization as the customer experience. So we really need to be laser focused on that because unfortunately, we cannot prioritize everything. There are different tools that you can use, like a prioritization matrix, but those two key documents from the beginning are really going to help you as well here. We also want to measure, communicate, and repeat. This is really where a lot of CX programs live, right? We collect the customer feedback, we do the reporting, we tell everybody what actions we want to take. We may not have the authority or the influence to make those happen, but that's kind of how a lot of CX programs start. It's with the customer feedback and insights. But what we don't want to do is provide that without context. We don't just want to spread a dashboard around and think that we're doing something. We want to make sure that we are providing insights and moving things forward based on those insights. And so this is about communicating, what do these metrics mean? How are we addressing them? What are some of the gaps? Where do we wish we knew more? And so that's where really understanding not just your customer journey, but also your feedback journey. What does that look like? How can you improve that? What's your feedback strategy? Because sometimes we skip ahead to the feedback tactics, but we don't talk about the fact that to do this well, we need to understand, why are we collecting this? What are we doing with it? If we are collecting feedback that we know we cannot take action on, we are wasting everybody's time. We are wasting resources. We are frustrating customers, and we're not able to make those changes. So we're just reporting stagnation. That's not a great place to be. So make sure when you are thinking about, how do we measure this? How do we communicate? And then what do we want people to really walk away with? That you're looking at the context of it. Report back on those quick wins that you get. If you find an insight and you think, oh my gosh, we can fix this tomorrow, and you fix it tomorrow, and then the number goes up because people are happy about it, report that out. Celebrate that. Make sure that you're telling stories. Make sure that you're sharing your customer stories in ways that humanize them. Because sometimes when we report on nothing but numbers and we call it big data, and we don't really talk about the people that those numbers represent, we get further and further away from the actual customer experience. So make sure, as you're communicating, as you're measuring, as you're reporting these things out, you are staying connected to that one person at the end, that one customer that you can tell their story as well. People are not moved by numbers, they are moved by humanity. So share that humanity and use the numbers to drive things forward, to talk about how you're measuring and how that all connects back to your organizational goals, your leadership goals, everything else. And then this is when we want to make sure we're connecting our best practices with that customer experience mission. And what I mean by that is, sometimes we talk about prioritization, we talk about journey mapping, we talk about these things, and they're almost done in a vacuum. So we don't really have a goal when we start those. I see this a lot with journey mapping. People say, we need a journey map. And we back up and say, okay, why? What's the goal here? Because if you have not defined the goal as it aligns to your customer experience mission and your customer experience success statement, then what that can mean is that you're going to produce something that is basically not much more than an art project. And I know that's kind of harsh to say, but if we don't connect these dots, and if we don't understand that best practices are there as tools, as part of our toolkit, as a tactic to support that strategy, then we're doing everything in a vacuum, and we're not going to get the results that we want. So when we talk about best practices, when you hear other people who talk about CX talk about, we've got to wow every customer, we've got to do a journey map, we've got to do this, before you get too excited about those best practices, ask yourself, how does this connect? How will we make sure this delivers on the strategy, on the mindset, and really making sure that we are living that customer experience mission? One of the other things we have are, it's a framework for your goals, for CX goals, called SMIRC. It's SMIRC. And that's because we want you to really define your goals and make sure that you are thinking of them in a way. There's a link that David just dropped in for that. But your SMIRC goals are all about making sure that you will be able to socialize these in the right way, that you'll be able to measure things in the right way. There's a lot to consider when we're talking about customer experience. So before you get down the path of just delivering on those tactics, make sure you're connecting all that to the strategy. Make sure you're really thinking through those goals, and make sure you know the goal before you move into one of those tactics. So, this was a big one today, folks. We covered 9 different things within 3 different facets. So, we talked about CX mindset. You need to start there. That's really about the impact that that has on your culture, on your employee experience, and constant, consistent communication. If you can focus on those, partner with your internal communications group, partner with different folks who can help you. This is a great way to move the organization forward. And this has to be a consistent focus no matter who you are or where you are on your internal CX journey. Then we want to move into defining the strategy, making sure that we have a clear customer experience strategy. We want to define success. We want to explore return on investment and make sure we make a case for that. And then we also want to make a case for the resources we need. If we need more budget, if we need more team, if we need more data access, we need to be the ones who step forward and proactively make those cases. And then finally, we get into the business discipline. How do we actually execute this day to day? This comes down to making sure you understand what are our roles and responsibilities and how will we prioritize. This is where you have that CX charter. Then you want to make sure you're measuring, communicating, and repeating. You're putting context and storytelling and really getting out there in the right way, not just with here are the numbers that are going up and down. And then we want to leverage best practices when they best serve our strategy. And so don't get caught up in those tactics. Don't fall for the shiny thing syndrome. Actually look at how can we deliver on this? How will this move our goals forward? So here's the thing. I often say that customer experience is not magic. It's not magic, it's management. Sometimes we want it to be magic. Sometimes we are treated by other leaders as if it's magic. They say, "Well, yeah, that must be so fun," right? We hear that. That must be so fun. And there is a lot of fun, but it takes real work and we can't overlook that. And so another way to think about this is that customer experience management is magic. That's where we can make the magic happen. That's where we can deliver on these big goals. We can show up for our customers and for each other in the right way. And we can lead our organization forward towards the goals that are important to us. So it's not just about the magic of, creating those amazing moments with our customers. It's about what are we doing on the inside of the organization and how are we as CX leaders showing up and leading those efforts? We need to be strategic. We need to define what success looks like, and we need to deliver on that through real discipline. And if we can do that, then we can live up to that customer experience mission. And that's what it's really all about. So, my question for you is what actions will you take to build on that foundation of customer experience that will serve your organization in long term ways? Don't fall for the let's improve our NPS and call that a goal. That's a great way to measure something that will drive business outcomes. We need to think about that and communicate that consistently. So, with that, I'm going to get a little water and take a little break and see if we have questions for our Ask Me Anything session. So, I'm curious what you all have to say. And as you have questions, don't be shy, drop them in the chat, and we will hear from you soon. And David's back.
That's right. I never left. Don't call it a comeback, Jeannie. Uh,
Been here for years.
yeah, we've got a couple questions that came in from the community over the course of the week that I want to jump into. Of course, if you have questions about this presentation that you just saw or about anything related to CX at all, throw it in the chat and we'll get to that live. But let's start with a question from Carrie. Carrie says, I work for a government organization that provides services to other government entities. We often ask our customers what they want, but in a lot of cases, they don't know. So I'm encouraging my organization to prioritize getting to know the business problems of key customers, understanding their business well enough to offer solutions proactively, because I don't think it's fair to expect customers to tell us what they want in all cases. Would you say that's a sound approach?
Yeah, great question, Carrie. I think you hit on a couple things there. One is you're absolutely right. Sometimes customers don't know what they want. And when we keep asking and then we aren't really solving their real problems, that can actually be very frustrating. So I would encourage you to think about not just what their business problems are, which is a great place to start, but also what do they show you through their behavior. So sometimes in customer experience we put all of our eggs into the customer feedback basket, but if we really want to understand our customers, we have to look at how they're behaving and what that tells us. So for example, you might look at in the digital space, it's pretty easy. You look at analytics, you look at where are they jumping, where do they get stuck in the process, what are they telling you in different ways there. So behavioral analytics are super important. I also am a big believer in observation. I think we can learn a lot by observing not just how they show up and what they want to do, but also what they're saying in the moment. So if you don't have a relationship with those contact center agents, I would really encourage you say, what are you hearing from them? Because often customers will say one thing to them in the moment, and then they go to the, surveys and they say, "I don't know, that's, sure, the customer service rep was great, so I'm gonna give them a 5," and never tell you about the problem that I actually called about. So make sure that you're getting that instant feedback and that your customer or your contact center agents have a way to provide that, because they have so much to share, as well as customer success reps if you have those, account managers, anybody who's kind of hands-on with the customer. And then I would also say, try things, in the digital world, we can do A/B testing, we can do pilots, see what works for your customers, offer different things, invite them into that process, co-create with them. So instead of just asking big white space questions of what would you like if you had that magic wand, if you have two different approaches, go ahead and test those and ask the customer, which one do you prefer? What do you like? So there are a whole bunch of different ways. I think we sometimes, I really appreciate that you asked this question, because I think we do talk a lot about customer feedback, which is straight up, what are they telling us based on what we're asking? And really, humans don't operate that way. So we have to make sure we're taking that into account for sure. But we also want to look at what are other ways we can get to know our customers? What are other ways that we can really watch for what they want next? And don't be afraid to look at your competitors, who I know you might think, well, we're in government, we don't have any competitors. Everybody who interacts with your customers, that is setting an expectation. And that's why you hear people say, we want to be the Amazon of X, because they know that Amazon, with their quick delivery and their easy apps and all of that, they are setting expectations for customers, not just in retail or in that type of industry, but everywhere. And so look to the marketplace and think about that too. What expectations do they have, and how can we better live up to those expectations? I would encourage you, once you start collecting this, think about doing an ideal state journey map, where you're literally mapping out, what would this look like if we could do this in the way that customers really want. That's a great thing to co-create with customers, to bring them into that process, get feedback, interview customers, all of those things. So in fact, we have a customer interview guide that might be helpful for you. It's really straightforward and simple, but there are so many ways to sit down with customers, look for that body language, look for how they're answering. There we go. David's on it with the links today. We've got a lot today. Thank you, David. And so we have a guide to really help you think through, how do you want to build that interview, and then how do you execute it in a way that you can get real, um, kind of open-ended feedback from customers. And sometimes that allows them to tell you things that you can't necessarily collect in surveys or in those other feedback mechanisms. So, yeah, I think about it as like a Venn diagram. What do we need to really understand what the customer is both telling us explicitly and what they might not even know they're telling us implicitly? And so think about what would be most helpful for you there. Great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And independently, Kirk this week also sent in a two-parter, and I think this ties in really, really nicely with what we're already talking about. Kirk asks, number one, how frequently should we survey our relationship customers? And
Mm,
two, what are the pros and cons to surveying too much or surveying too little? If we survey too much or too little, what's going to happen?
mhm. Yeah. Okay. So there's no perfect formula here for how often. What I like to do is make sure we're being consistent. So, for instance, if you have a relationship uh, based survey, a relational NPS, let's say, that you want to send out once a year, that's great. Once a year, as long as you're consistent about it, because that's where you get the value. Some people do this more frequently. If you do it more frequently and nothing changes in between, then that feels like it's wasting time to the customer. So if you're doing a monthly NPS, let's say, and literally nothing changes in 30 days, then that's a hard thing to ask them about. So I would say, relationship wise, just make sure you're doing it in a way that respects kind of the time between surveys, because that's where you'll get better information. When it comes to the second part, which I'm blanking on, so I might need your help here, David. Uh,
Yeah, the pros and cons of surveying too much or too little.
yes, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So what, understanding what is too much and too little is something that I think we're constantly grappling with. There is survey fatigue out there. And because what we have to remember is that our customers are not just marching through our journey linearly like good little soldiers. They are living their lives. They are customers of many places. They are dealing with their own work, professional lives and personal lives and everything else. So when we think, oh, we're only surveying them once a month, what's the big deal? They're getting surveys from all sorts of other places too. So the risk between too much and too little. Too much is exactly what I just said. Like, if you're not giving people enough space and you're not changing anything, then that is going to frustrate them because they're basically saying, hey, I've told you this for 6 months in a row and nothing's changing, right? The other thing is, how realistic is it to close the loop with the customer? If you cannot close the loop on a regular basis and tell them what's happening with the feedback they gave you, then you're probably doing it too much. So that's one thing. If you don't do it enough, so here's the thing about enough, because when you look at feedback strategy, which is how I like to think about this, we want to make sure that we're not just relying on like that one big annual survey. We want to give customers ways to provide feedback, both in explicit and implicit ways. So that means that if you have a mobile app that you send out or that customers use a lot, make sure you have persistent ways that they can give you feedback right there. So if something's not working, there are persistent one question feedback things. Like sometimes it looks like a little tab, and you can pull it out as the user and say, "This isn't working," or "I really love this," or "Thanks for making this," whatever. That can be incredibly useful. And because it's actually on behalf of the customer, like it's up to them whether or not to pull out that tab, it's not that feeling of like, "Oh, you guys are hammering me with these surveys." So look at kind of your overarching feedback strategy and decide, are there better ways to collect feedback? And just like I answered before, look at operational data, your renewal rates, your churn rates, your how many people are contacting customer service. All of those things can help you really understand what's happening in ways that don't just rely on feedback from customers. So look at your operational data, look at your analytics, look at, the observational work that I talked about. All of that is part of the package of understanding our customers. If we just rely on surveys, we're really missing important information. And we're also assuming a lot about the customer. We're assuming that they're giving us the best information. We're assuming that the ones who are so mad at us that they are not responding are just not part of the equation. There are so many things. So surveys are important. Customer feedback is important, but it's part of the equation. It's not the full equation. So when I approach feedback strategy, I really think about what is the actual customer journey and what can we do about it in that moment. If we are asking questions we can't do anything about, that is absolutely the wrong place to start. If we are asking questions that we can't close the loop on with them, that's not fair to them either. So really think about what is the natural progression of, if we ask this question here, what will happen to the customer? What can we do in the organization? And how will we drive action with it? And if you can't identify, yes, we can close the loop, yes, we want to move this into action, and here's how we're going to do it, then you really need to rethink, why are we asking this from our customers? Yeah. So, oh, there we go. Listening
Yeah.
assessment. I forget all the things.
You made me think of this, Jeannie. Our customer listening assessment guidebook, another one of our free resources that can help
Mhm.
you really understand where feedback is being collected, how it's being used, who's responsible for that feedback once it's collected. a lot of stuff in there as well about centralizing how that feedback is
Yep.
collected and evaluated and shared so that it's not you're not doing things redundantly or the ball's not getting dropped. So
Yes.
that's a great resource as well.
Yes. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'd forgotten we even had that. So
Yeah, we have so many of these. We've forgotten some of these that we've actually made.
That's right. But yeah, that's great.
Mm,
All
cool.
right. Any other
Um,
questions?
no questions. A couple comments that I'll point out. One, the name didn't come through. That happens sometimes. I
Yep.
apologize if this was your comment, but very useful. Thank you very much. And yeah, delighting customers. Uh, it's about how do we delight the customers, but
That's right.
ultimately that goal of delighting customers is a great one to have. I
Mhm.
want to highlight a comment from Molly as
Oh,
well.
Molly.
Great insight. Give yourself time to make changes. Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us, Molly. Good to see you here.
And that's it for our questions from the audience right now. So we can end it right there. But Jeannie, do you have any other kind of wrap up final? This is so much information, so it might be a
It
little
is
bit
a
of a
lot.
challenge to tie it all up with a bow. But any
Yeah.
final thoughts?
I think the key is to start with the basics. Start with how do you define success because that makes everything else easier. And then really we provide all these resources because we see how uh people do want it to be magic. They say, "Hey, CX leader, make great CX." And they kind of pat you on the back. And what we want to do is provide the right resources and tools for you so that you can move through this process wherever you are on your customer experience journey. But if you have not taken those first two steps, defined your mission statement, defined your success statement, then you're probably doing a lot of tactics that aren't necessarily tied to a strategy. And when it comes to customer experience, it is just like any other part of the business. We need to approach it with discipline. We need to make sure that we understand what success looks like so that we can measure it accordingly and that we can get everybody on board with what we're doing because we cannot do this alone. We need to influence our leaders, we need to get their buy in, we need to have more resources, all of those things. So make sure that as you walk through this process of let's get our mindset right, let's define our CX strategy, and let's deliver with business discipline, that you're constantly looking at, okay, what can we do to move forward, not just for our customers, which is absolutely a huge part of that mission, but how do we deliver for our organization? Because otherwise, you won't get those resources. People won't understand. They won't give you that buy in. And that is so critical for success. So I know many of you are fighting the good fight. Many of you are out there really doing your best to move customer experience forward in your organization. And, we're here for you. So let us know. And maybe we can pull up the how to reach us. There we go. So let us know what questions do you have? What content do you want to see us write about and share in this venue? We have not been as live as much this year just because of schedules, but whenever we can, we are here live for you and then otherwise we produce videos that answer these questions as well. So if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, we have all of these archived there and available to you. So lots of different resources. I think there are more than 70 videos now for you to check out. So as we move forward, please remember that our mission is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by you being here with us today, you are helping us live that mission. So thank you so much, not just for showing up here, but for showing up every day on behalf of your customers, living your CX mission and delivering leadership throughout your organization. Thanks for being here. We will see you again and reach out if you have questions. Thanks, everybody.